But we'll go ahead and get started. I don't want to keep Bob and Mike waiting any longer. But for those of you who haven't met, my name is Jack Duffley. I'm the president of this great club, Allure, the Land Use and Real Estate Society. So I appreciate you all coming out to our very first webinar this fall. We'll be doing about 7 more of these this fall, and we'll be bringing in a lot of great guests to talk about their careers in real estate law. So if you know anyone else who might be interested, definitely would appreciate having them reach out to our club email at lure@kentlaw.it.edu, and then we'll always record and post all of our webinars on our student org site, which you can just Google Land Use and Real Estate Society, and it'll be the first result. But without further ado, I want to introduce our guests, Bob Higgins and Mike Brancheau of Higgins and Brancheau, a small commercial real estate firm here in Chicago. Bob and Mike have a lot of experience in the space, and I'm very excited to have them as our first guests. Without further ado, I'll go ahead and turn it over to them. And just a quick reminder as well, if you have questions for Mike and Bob as they're talking, just go ahead and put them in the chat. I'll act as a sort of moderator, unless you want to hold your questions till the end, since we'll have an open question and answer session during the last 10 or 15 minutes or so. But without further ado, let's get this thing rolling. Mike and Bob, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Jack. Good to see you. And I'm going to say hello to my partner, whom I haven't seen in a long time. Hi, Mike.
That's nice to see you as well, Bob.
You want to start, or you want me to?
Go ahead, lead us off.
When Jack told us about this, he suggested that we talk for 30 or 45 minutes, and then would leave you with some time to ask us questions. I think if Mike and I talk for 30 or 45 minutes, we're going to watch each of you fall asleep. So we would much prefer some sort of a roundtable type thing, and we'll give you some topics to talk about, but we're happy to respond to your questions right away. You can stick them in the chats column if you want to, but you can also simply ask us. I think the more fluid this discussion, probably the better it would be for all of you. So I guess the first topic that you might find of some interest is how a guy very close to retirement, such as me, and a guy right out of law school, such as Mike, got together and became a law firm. And so without boring you with a great deal of detail, I'll tell you that back in the earlier crisis, I've always been a real estate transactional lawyer. Back in the earlier crisis, the one when you folks were probably all in school, that pretty much collapsed the mortgage industry, I pivoted from real estate transactions to mortgage foreclosures. I was fortunate enough to hook up with a bank client, and I was doing a lot of commercial mortgage foreclosures. And I found myself overwhelmed and overworked, and Mike was looking for a internship, and I hired him as a summer intern in the summer of 2012. I had a sole practice at the time. I had left behind a general counsel gig that I had had for about 12 years and was off on my own practicing real estate law. Mike came aboard, caught on right away, and by the end of the summer, I had decided that I no longer wanted to be a sole practitioner, that there was room in my office for somebody who could work like he does. And so I hired Mike, and after a few years of finding ourselves getting together just fine, working very well with each other, I offered Mike a partnership, and he accepted, and that was in 17, Mike?
Yes, 2017 was our first year as partners.
And it is, it's kind of the way I crafted it in my mind long before I met Mike. It's giving me an exit strategy, and it's allowing our clients to a smooth transition. They can continue to utilize the firm's services as I ride off into the sunset in the next few years. So that's how the two of us came together. Mike, you want to add anything to that?
No, I mean, for me, it's always a unique story because when you're in law school, you're looking for all these different interviews and all these different job fairs and things like that. And for me, I was put in touch with Bob as really my first contact out of during my second year of school, and it just clicked, and that ended all searches for me. So no, that's exactly how it came about. It's funny to hear it from Bob's point of view. It's his way out, and from my point of view, it's been my way in. It's a really good runway as a young attorney to pair up with a senior attorney who's already well established with a sophisticated book of business, and somebody who can teach you everything you need to know in order to prepare yourself for your the next 30 years.
You might also be interested. Go ahead, Mike.
No, go ahead, please.
You might also be interested in how one morphs from being a very good employee to being a partner candidate. And obviously this is a unique situation because there's only two of us, but I didn't hire Mike with the idea of making him a partner, but as he learned how to practice law, there was never once during that time that he didn't deal with this business as if it were his own. And that's something I think anybody could take away from this. As you each get your first positions, think about not being an employee, whether or not that's the firm you ultimately end up with, but think about being an owner and how you would deal with this business if it were yours, rather than simply something that's providing you with a healthy living. That sort of attitude is very obvious to those around you. And I think for me, it demonstrated to me that this guy was different than a lot of other people that I have worked with and who have worked for me, etc., because he had a long view, wasn't waiting for the paycheck. He wasn't waiting for what time it was to go home. He made himself available, and he dealt with this business like it was his own. And now it is. So that is something that I think you could all learn from. I think I wish I had known that back when I was your age.
And to piggyback off of that, I always, I guess, tell students when I'm talking about my career path is because I went to undergrad at Illinois studying finance, kind of actually wanting to go into development, and I graduated during the crisis that Bob was talking about and decided to go to law school as a safety net, essentially. And because I didn't really know that I wanted to be a lawyer until I went to law school, I really had no career aspirations, big firm, small firm. I really had no idea, which was kind of the best thing to happen because I didn't have any biases going in one way or the other to any of my job opportunities. I worked at mid-sized firms. I got the feel there. I worked at a larger firm. I didn't particularly like it that much. You kind of don't know when your best opportunity is going to come from. So it may be a smaller firm that you get an interview with that turns out to be the best thing for you. Or it may be the big firm job, but kind of keeping that level head and going into whatever opportunity you are able to, get out of school and go into, that's how you can turn it into something much, much more than just a job. So,
have we generated any questions yet?
Yeah, I had a few sent in actually from folks who couldn't make it. One was asking, Mike, you kind of answered it. You said you already wanted to do real estate development, but this would be a good question for you too, Bob. But what drove each of you to pick a career in real estate law as opposed to some other area?
That actually trips something that I was going to talk about. When I started with a very small general practice firm back in the 70s, believe it or not, they had me doing litigation. This was a firm you have never heard of. It's long since gone. And after a couple years of litigation, which I didn't really care for very much, but it was something to do. And I really didn't know what I wanted to do when I exited law school. In fact, I think I thought I wanted to do litigation. A a position sort of opened up there because they got a significant amount of real estate work came through the door, and I volunteered to learn how to do that. And it was only after the mentorship that I had, the instruction that I received from a couple of excellent lawyers at that law firm, that I discovered that I actually enjoyed real estate work so much more than litigation. But the point of this that I wanted to drive home was, it was the experience that I had with litigation that allowed me many years later to pivot, as I was talking about before, and handle mortgage foreclosures when there weren't any real estate transactions. So if you start out in an area that you don't really care for, or you decide somewhere along the line to change what you're doing, the experience you had prior to that date may turn out to be something very, very valuable. Had I not known how to do litigation in the early part of this century, I would have probably been working at Brooks Brothers.
Yeah, I would second that. I mean, I started with Bob because of the foreclosure crisis. Again, not your, I guess, traditional, area of law that you want to practice in. But you do kind of learn the ugly side of the real estate business, or, you learn the ins and outs of being in court and learning how to present yourself in front of a judge, and different skills that you're going to, that almost all lawyers will at least have to do at some point in their career. I feel like if you're going to be diverse, and real estate isn't always just the good transactions. You're going to run into problems, and there's going to be rent default, and there's going to be foreclosures. So a broad skill set is extremely helpful.
That's kind of related to the question that Carl's is posing, and that's, what does a typical day look like for a real estate attorney? So you're obviously dealing with a lot of different issues. So is there any sort of routine to it? What does a typical day look like for you guys?
Nowadays, it's in my PJs, walking down to my office. So, but I would say in a transactional practice, our typical day starts with, it's kind of like you start with checking. Obviously, you're going to get your emails up, and one client's going to send you a lease. Another client might have a new purchase that they're working on. Another client might have a rent dispute with a tenant. So your typical day really isn't that typical. It truly depends on what your clients are working on. I mean, for us as a smaller practice, and I think Bob would agree, we kind of have a pretty diverse base of clients, to where we're in different sectors, we're in different industries, we're in different markets. So your typical day can be pretty unique, just depending on which type of transaction you happen to be working on at that time.
I would add to that it's document oriented. This will come as no surprise to anybody, but while you can't really lay out a program for what your day is going to be, you can be pretty much assured that something at the center of it all is going to be some sort of a document. We may be negotiating a purchase contract. We may be amending a lease, or negotiating a lease, or arguing about what a lease says with another lawyer or in front of a judge. But typically there is some document at the center of what we're doing, and that defines where we go. And then there's other documents that we create, such as closing documents when we handle a real estate transaction, new leases, amendments, that sort of thing. So there is no typical day, at least not Mike in my world, but all of it revolves around some sort of documentation, preparation, or interpretation.
Yeah, the lawyer is a lot like, we kind of act as the mechanism that gets the deals actually formalized and finalized. If you think about the brokers putting the people together and the parties negotiating the terms, the lawyer is the one who has to document each step of the way and make sure you're getting all of the pieces put together in the right way and in the right order, in order to have a successful closing. So you find yourself playing quarterback a little bit and really making sure that everything is organized and on track for each transaction.
And let's not forget that we are also counselors. And there are times when it's your duty to advise your client that they should think a different way than perhaps they're thinking. Sometimes that comes about when we're negotiating some sort of a dispute resolution, and your client is adamant, and you think there may be some holes in this argument that your client is advancing, and perhaps they should consider compromising. There are times when you simply advise your client to be quiet when they don't want to be quiet. So that is a role that I think you learn. You've already started learning it because you've dealt with other people all your lives. And the more interaction you have with other people and ultimately other lawyers and clients, you're going to learn when to say stop and when to say go and when to tell your client that they need to back off.
Can I jump in with a question?
Please.
Absolutely.
My name's Hannah. I'm a 1L. And Mike, I'm wondering, because I know you mentioned that you originally intended to go into development, what kept you in the law field?
Yeah, so that's a good question. I mean, I always looked at going into law as kind of taking just a different angle into getting into the transaction. So while maybe you're not working for the owner developer, you're still you're just a different piece. So I was still, I guess I would go back to finding my partnership with Bob, and thankfully he had work that I found to be very interesting and fulfilling. I was some of my skill, just personal skill set, fits being a lawyer maybe better than it does certain other professions. And ultimately, this opportunity that comes up that grabs my interest, keeps me in real estate, which is what my first passion was, and gave me a chance to build, our practice together. So I think it was a combination of finding the right fit. I can honestly tell you, in people that I've networked with or spoken with, that have worked at larger firms, or maybe attorneys that are less, they don't have as much integrity in their practice, things like that. Those types of attorneys tend not to be happy. And I've seen plenty of them. So I think law can be a really demanding field, and you find a lot of attorneys that maybe want to find their way out. But I think what stuck for me is that our practice was very enjoyable and very, it just came easy, I guess, so there was no reason to leave it. It's one thing that I would say. I mean, in addition to, like I said, certain skills, you just find yourself enjoying something that maybe most people would dread. Most people don't want to read 100-page leases. It really depends on if you are happy or not in doing the work, which I was.
I can speak slightly to that too, Hannah. Before I started this solo practice in 2001, I spent 12 years as general counsel for a real estate investment trust. So while I was practicing law, to a certain extent, I was also on the business side for those 12 years. And in fact, I supervised outside counsel, so I had lawyers working for me, but I was as much the client as I was the lawyer. That's exciting to get into the legal department of a real estate company, because it's a little bit of both worlds, both business and legal representation. I would encourage anybody to do that. I enjoyed those 12 years of my career. The reason I left is because it was a finite life trust that had an end when it was founded. It was given a finite life, and we had to wrap up the trust and sell all its assets.
A couple follow-ups to that, Bob. Just for anyone who isn't as familiar yet with the terminology, what is a real estate investment trust? And then also, how did you actually end up getting involved with that?
A real estate investment trust is a a creature of the tax code. And I wish I was a little bit more conversant on it to tell you why that has some advantages over a real estate company of any kind. But I'm not prepared to discuss that at this moment. But it's typically a public traded company that buys and sells real estate for profit for its shareholders. And so we had SEC reporting obligations. We were subject to all of the same regulations and criteria that any other public company is subject to. And you do feel very scrutinized, but it can be very exciting. You have obviously a lot of capital to deal with. You can acquire major projects, et cetera. So that was exciting. And I've forgotten the second part of your question already.
How did you get involved with that REIT?
I was doing development work as a real estate lawyer for Chapman & Cutler. They decided that there was an inherent conflict between my clients and the clients that they typically represented because they were banks, et cetera, the other side of the transaction. So when one of my clients threatened to sue one of their clients, or one of the companies, one of Chapman & Cutler's clients, it became obvious that it was time for me to move my practice someplace else. I found this position at that time. I interviewed for it, and it seemed like a great opportunity, so I took it.
Then Rodrigo's had a question here in the chat. Are there any particular skills you guys look for when hiring an intern or a recent grad?
Organization. It's hard to tell from someone from an interview, but a real estate lawyer needs to be very organized. Mike is extremely organized. And for me, and this is something, again, you learn over time. It's hard to glean it in an interview, but I'm looking for someone who has unquestionable integrity. I think I actually had this conversation with you, Jack, when we sat down for lunch one day, but during the course of your career, unless you are different than every other lawyer who's ever practiced, you're going to be presented with an opportunity at some point in time to make some money in a way that you know you shouldn't. And that's when you have to remember how important integrity is. And many lawyers succumb to that temptation. It's the people who say no that I'm looking for.
Yeah, I think going back to what Bob said, I mean, somebody who comes in wanting to treat the job like it's their own and their career and something that they see as an opportunity, that's always something that we look for. Organization is a big thing. A big part of practicing law is attention to detail. And I know it sounds somewhat cliche, but if you don't pay attention to what you're doing very closely on deadlines, on the provisions in each document that you're reading, you may read 1,000 leases your first year or throughout your career, but every one of those is going to have nuance to it. And if you miss that nuance, you can cost your client money or leverage or any other, potentially bad outcome for them. So like Bob said, those are harder things to pick up in an interview, but those would be what we would look at. If you're asking about grades and school, and those are certainly, I guess, important, but I went to a pretty lowly law school in New York City that wasn't anything impressive. So I'm not one to buy into, grades and where you went. I think personal qualities and integrity are more important.
And on a kind of related note, we had someone send in a question asking, when you were law students, what did you both do to prepare for a career in real estate law? Well, I guess if anything at all for real estate specifically.
I thought I was going to be a litigator. I studied property, And that's basically it. I didn't really learn real estate law until I started practicing it 2 or 3 years out of law school. I was on a different path by choice.
Yeah, I guess I joined real estate groups. Our law school had a commercial real estate group. I was a part of that. The best thing you can do is network, find mentors that are going to keep track of you and kind of stay on their radar without, just making sure you can get in front of them. There's certainly plenty of people out there. I've had them in my career, that people that'll just take care of you. They'll look out for you. They'll write you your letters of recommendation when you need it. They'll be your references on your interviews. There's a lot of really strong people out there that will mentor you. So that's kind of the biggest thing that I did. I always tell the story that I think one of my mentors wrote me 4 different letters of recommendation and helped me get into law school and helped me get my first job in New York and helped me get my position with Bob. So the people that really care about you, stay on their radar.
And Mike, a follow up to that. You went to school in New York, you said, but did you always want to practice in Chicago? And if so, how did you manage trying to build a network that way? If you were, we'll call it abroad.
Yeah, that was a not well thought out. I had always wanted to go to school in New York and, or at least out of state. So after I graduated from Illinois, I did want to be in Chicago. I knew I would end up in Chicago, but I wanted to try. You're in law school for 3 additional years, so it's a long time to continue being a student. So I wanted to do it somewhere else. That aspect of it, I don't regret, but it was extremely hard. None of my network translated back to my practice now. Everybody in New York, I still have some contacts there that every now and then I'll catch up with, but it has not been fruitful. And, to the extent that you guys are looking to practice in Chicago, you're already, 10 steps ahead of me, because it wasn't something I thought of when I made the decision of where to go to law school. And I guess hindsight, I probably would have thought about that a little bit more.
Well, then how, after you graduated, how did you end up building your network here? It sounds like you're almost starting from scratch in a way.
Yeah, you are. I would go back to, I would go to U of I alumni events, and I would join there's so many different trade organizations that you can join in and go to different networking events. So you kind of just start, you got to hit the ground running, and you got to meet people and get over that hurdle of asking someone to coffee, because truthfully, it happens all the time. So I think that's one thing as a student you don't realize. When you ask somebody to go out and have lunch or coffee, you feel like you're asking them for a big favor, and it's just not. So as soon as you get over that fear, you can really stack your calendar up with as many meetings as you can make, and build your network as quickly as you can, because that's what's ultimately going to translate into clients down the road.
On a similar note to that, good question for both of you guys right now. How are you maintaining your networks right now, given the circumstances? Are you continuing to build your network? And if so, how has that looked?
I'll go first on this one, because I think just being younger, and there is definitely a piece of this that has really made it difficult. I'm not meeting as many new people anymore because you can't. I don't know if the Zoom meetings kind of are as, joint, these larger networking events that you used to go to in person and you used to trade cards and things like that. I haven't really tried to do many of those virtually. But what I will say is that all those years that I've spent building a network have resulted in having plenty of people in my bullpen to call and catch up with, which I've done, and plenty of people that still need your services. So they're just as stuck as we are as far as developing new business. So they're going to look back to the people that helped them pre-COVID, and so that's kind of, you kind of nurture your existing network, because you can't build a new one as easily right now.
I would second that. I'm essentially maintaining mine. I'm not really reaching out to new people unless something comes up where there's some sort of a lead. But I am making a point of, if I haven't talked to a specific client in a period of time, I'll call them shoot an email to somebody who I haven't heard from, just trying to keep up with the people that are already in the network to make sure that they're still with us and surviving this mess. And I would add to this, by the way, Michael knows how to network. He has taught himself how to network, and he does a great job of it. He has built a nice practice for himself, not of my clients, but of clients that he has generated at his young age in the last 8 years.
Well, thanks. Yeah, I mean, it's about you kind of got to look at it like a numbers game a little bit. You have to get out in front of people. You're not going to get work from everyone. Not everybody is going to, you're going to do your best to keep up with everyone. And I guess the only other advice is when you are networking with people, you should, the way I look at it is, when you're in college, you're around 1,000 other students of your own age, and you have this nice friendship, that you can build basically with all your classmates. When you're in law school, you have the same thing. When you get into your career, that kind of stops, right? You're not around as many people anymore. So your networking is going to be easier for you to do if you look at it as if you're building long-lasting relationships, because that's essentially what you're doing. The work will come, but it's only going to come once somebody knows you, trusts you, and they're not typically going to meet you at a coffee and send you their first transaction. They're not usually going to trust you that quickly. So I think, a mistake that you can make is going into a lot of meetings like, okay, I'm going to network now, and not treating that other person, treating them like they're a potential source rather than a potential relationship, if that makes sense.
Carl has just posted another question in the chat, unrelated, but it says, I saw that your firm has represented multi-million-dollar acquisitions. What type of work did that entail?
Well, it's fun. It's a lot of fun. We've done large office, we've done acquisitions and financings and sales of large office complexes, industrial buildings, multifamily, condominium projects, from the ground up. In fact, we've actually handled construction loans as well. But on these multi-million-dollar projects, it typically starts with a contract, either to acquire or sell it, and then we'll negotiate the contract, often with a law firm that you've heard of, usually on the other side, and they're all kind of wondering how it happened that our client is represented by the two of us. But we get past that pretty quickly when they realize that we have the same level of sophistication that they do, and we move on. We negotiate the contract. We work through the due diligence. If our client is acquiring the property, there's typically some negotiation down the road when we amend the contract and reach the point of whether or not we're going forward. Then there's the actual closing. There's the dickering that goes back and forth over the closing figures, and sometimes there's post-closing stuff. We have to go back to the contract that we worked so hard to draft or review and figure out whether or not we protected our client as well as we should have.
Yeah, I would add on the larger the deal is, it doesn't make the contract itself necessarily any more or less complex. While they typically are a little bit more complex, but a purchase and sale agreement is relatively the same regardless of where your property's at or what the price is. The larger deals tend to have a lot more due diligence items. So you're reviewing, if you're buying a downtown Chicago office building, for example, you're going to have 15 or 20 leases that you might need to review. You're going to have those leases have estoppel certificates and different lender requirements that you're going to have to keep track of. You're going to have property reports and zoning reports and environmental reports. You're going to have a survey that is typically going to have more showing on it than a building out in the suburbs that has, nothing around it and no other developments around it. You're going to have more documents in the way of easement agreements between neighbors and between governmental authorities that are, have access to the property. You're going to have there's a lot more that goes into a downtown office building than a 4-unit residential building in the western suburbs, for example, of Chicago. So your due diligence is a lot deeper, and you're doing a lot more evaluating. There's always some unique piece to these larger complexes. That's what makes them fun.
And how are you guys able to land deals like that? Obviously, you have the sophistication and all that, but a lot of developers will probably go for the brand name, larger firms. How do you guys overcome that initially? Basically, how does this business end up in your lap?
This particular business, a lot of it ended up in our lap because of my years with the Real Estate Investment Trust. Being a general counsel allowed me to, for a real estate investment trust, allowed me to meet with other sophisticated owners, players in the real estate market. My colleagues at the Real Estate Investment Trust, when we broke up, they all went off and formed businesses. So I picked up clients that way. But we also represent a pension fund, and I hooked on with them through a little bit of luck. And because I was a general counsel, I was able to and on my own, I was able to step into a unique situation where they really couldn't hire a law firm to do what they wanted done. And that's how we caught on with this pension fund, which generates a lot of our major projects. Don't discount the benefit of good luck.
And you wouldn't have gone. Go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, I would say one thing too, that Bob's the best thing about working with Bob, who's been, who's able to share his experiences with me as a younger attorney, is that you shouldn't go in selling yourself short, because that's only going to make that person across the table from you look at you differently. So if you can handle something, go in there confidently saying you can handle it. If you can't, confidently say that you can't, because they appreciate that just as much, especially in law. You just don't want to be caught saying yes to everything when you don't know how to do it. So I think it does go back to networking as far as generating business and then bringing your A game when you do get that work to make sure they're happy with what you've done. Being
a 2-person shop, it sounds like you guys are naturally incredibly busy a lot of the time. Do you guys do anything outside of the firm? Any organizations you guys are in, activities? I'm sure you got something else besides real estate transactions going on.
I'm an amateur cyclist. I play softball, but not this summer. I was a lot more active in networking and organizations that had to do with my career than I am now. I figure I got a couple years left. I'm spending less time working and more time playing. Mike, on the other hand, is doing just the opposite.
One more time working. So actually, I see Hannah. She's on the associate board with me, but I'm on the executive board for the Harold E. Eisenberg Foundation. They're a cancer research foundation that is comprised of real estate professionals. So that kind of has, especially during COVID, we've actually been doing seemingly more meetings than we were pre-COVID. And then I also do wish granting for Make-A-Wish Foundation that keeps us busy on the outside. But yeah, other than that, it is a lot of work, and I like to work out. So anything that has the word work in it is usually good for me. You'll find me doing it.
Mike, could you talk more about the Harold Eisenberg Foundation for those who might not be familiar with it?
So the Harold Eisenberg Foundation was, Harold E. Eisenberg was a real estate developer who passed away from colorectal cancer in 1999. And his family formed this foundation following his death for purposes of raising money for cancer research. It's since developed into kind of a juggernaut in the real estate industry. We have multiple events each year that are basically geared towards the foundation's dual focus of real estate education and cancer research. So some of our events are heavily geared towards real estate education, such as Career Day, which normally takes place in November. And it's not going to be happening this year in the way that it traditionally would. But it's definitely a foundation you should look to get into as students. They have, I think, 12 different umbrellas of real estate education programs, from all-day mentorships, coffee meetings that you can sign up for with real estate professionals, different events that you can go to, scholarships that you can apply to. So all sorts of things I would recommend you guys signing up. And I will give a sneak peek because I was going to be reaching out to Jack anyway, but they have we're reformatting our Career Day event that we normally do in October, and it's going to be a week-long event coming up in January. It's going to be virtual, but it's going to be a kind of a week filled with various real estate activities and Zoom meetings with professionals, both intimate and roundtables and the work. So we'll get that on your radar. More information is going to start coming out very soon on that event.
Thanks, appreciate that. And I put the Eisenberg Foundation website in the chat for you guys to check out. Definitely worth checking out. If anything, just for their mentorship program, if you want to shadow other real estate attorneys besides Mike. Well, I guess you can't really shadow folks here right now because of the virtual nature of things, but for the future, definitely a great resource. Does anyone else have any other questions? I've gone through the whole list of what everyone sent in who's not here.
Yeah, so I want to thank everyone for speaking today, but there is one thing I did want to follow up on, and I want to ask both Mr. Higgins and Mike, do either of you invest in real estate for yourselves, and if so, what form?
Well, first of all, Mr. Higgins is not on this call. My father couldn't make it, but I've had the opportunity to invest in real estate with clients from time to time, and I will confess to having done so on a couple of occasions with one particular client, and those investments all worked out very well. After having done that and watching another transaction that this client sponsored go in the wrong direction, and hearing from some of the unhappy investors in his portfolio, I decided against it for the future. So my investments in real estate now would be through a brokerage, just buying the same kinds of things you could buy, shares in a real estate company or that sort of thing. So after that experience, even though mine was all positive, I decided that I would, that I probably dodged a bullet and that I would avoid investments in my clients' projects.
I have not yet had that chance. It is something that's on my radar. I think one thing that if you would have asked me when I graduated undergrad, I would have told you that by now I would have. And same thing if you would have asked me right after law school. But I think there was two things that kind of factored into that. One was I elected to focus on a massive law school student bill that pretty much could have been an investment. And the other thing is once I started really gaining traction with Bob and kind of realizing, without presuming, but knowing that we were going places and knowing that a partnership was down the road, and then knowing that you were going to have to actually carry that business, I really kind of put some of the other activities on the side for now. It's a very full-time job to practice law and manage a law business, because there are many things that you need to do as a business owner that aren't billable. And when you don't have a large firm, if you're not billing, nobody else is. So you kind of have to, I guess I really wanted to, as a younger attorney and a younger partner, just in general, I knew there was a lot of effort that was going to have to be put into making sure that I do this right and that it doesn't flounder once I started taking over more and more of our practice. And then eventually when Bob decides to do more fun things, you know, you just have to be prepared. So I think it was between a mix of paying off student debt and doing normal things like buying a house and getting married and stuff like that, and then running a business and realizing that it just takes a full on focus to run your own practice. Now that's not to say as I get better at this and you know, as things go differently, I am interested and do still want to do that somewhere down the line. But right now, just, you know, I'm 32. I've been a partner for 3.5 years now. So it feels like I've been doing this for a while, but there's still a lot that takes up my time and just, you know, spending that time getting better at what I'm doing.
Bob, could you talk a little bit more about the risk of investing with clients?
It's the relationship risk, I think. I mean, typically when we invest, we all know that our capital is at risk, and I wasn't as concerned about losing some or all of the investment as I was about damaging the relationship with the client if the investment went bad. Obviously, if an investment goes good, everybody loves everybody and things are great, and it only enhances your relationship. But some investments go bad, and that was my concern. And I saw that my client's relationship with some of his other longtime investors deteriorated greatly over one bad deal. And it really wasn't his fault, but nonetheless, they all lost money. And I was glad I was not in on that deal, and I was glad that our relationship didn't suffer as a result of that.
Thank you. Any other questions before we wrap up? Going once. Well, Mike and Bob, I very much appreciate. I would ask for an applause if we were in person, but that'd be a little awkward right now. So thank you for coming. We very much appreciate it. If it'd be okay for me to share your contact information with the club, in case anyone wants to reach out with any other questions they might have, they might think of later, or if they just want to learn a little bit more about what you guys are doing. Would that be all right?
Certainly okay with me.
Yeah, by all means. And, you know, I as Jack knows this, actually, we're open. So if this were normal times, we would tell you we'd shadow us for a day or anything like that we could help out with. But yeah, definitely reach out to us. Like I said, get over the fear of asking for an hour of somebody's time. And certainly I hope I make that easy enough on anybody that wants to chat.
All right, thank you. Until next time, we'll have our next seminar next week, everyone else. But thanks again, Bob and Mike. Take care, everyone.
All right. See you later, Jack.
Good night, everybody.